Hey everybody, Mr. Berg here again with a video about value scales. What are value scales? Well, it's a range of light to dark or dark to light. We're going to use a pencil. Actually, I might use a marker for part of it, for one of the value scales. I'll talk about that when we get to it. But value is a great way that you can make objects look three-dimensional. Here we go. So you're going to be asked to create 5 value scales, and each one has 5 boxes. Here's how I want you to do that. I have this fancy ruler that I just got from Target yesterday. You do not have to use a ruler. You can use a straight edge, but for me, this works well. I'm going to draw a straight line across. Boy, this flexible ruler doesn't draw very straight lines. And that's kind of hard for you to see. So, for the actual scales, let me go back to using a marker. All right, I'm going to draw a big rectangle. And this is going to be one of my value scales. So I'm going to go across the top and across the bottom, create some parallel lines. And now I'm going to divide this into 5 long boxes. Okay, so let's go like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And these are going to be my 5 shading value scales. Which means I'm going to start really dark over here and gradually get lighter, 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 plain white paper. Just shading. Shading is really smooth, okay? If you're drawing a dolphin and you want to look three-dimensional, you'd probably use shading because dolphins are really smooth and wet. Then I'm going to do another value scale called hatching, and then cross-hatching, and then stippling, which I'm probably going to use a marker. Now, here's the trick to this. The reason we do value scales is so that you can create three-dimensional objects using different materials. Here's what I mean by that. You can't shade with a marker because no matter how hard you press with a marker, it's always going to be the same value, right? If I press hard with this Sharpie, it's going to be the same as if I press light with the Sharpie, okay? But a pencil or a colored pencil is different. And I'm going to show you that in a second here. This is going to be hatching. Then I'm going to do a cross-hatching, stippling, and scribbles, okay? So I'm just going to make all 5 value scales, and then we'll get started on this. This is going to be cross-hatching. This one's going to be stippling. And this one is going to be scribbles. Make sure I spell this right. Scribbles. Okay? Now, for my shading one, I'm using a pencil. Now, the reason we use shading with a pencil is because if you press really hard, it's going to make a darker value or a darker shade. Shading should look really smooth. Now, you don't want to just scribble and color it in. We're going to save that for the scribbles. Sometimes, if I'm shading, I even change the way I'm holding my pencil like this so I get more of the graphite on the paper. And this down here is going to be my darkest value. Now, I didn't create these boxes for no reason. I created these boxes so that I can practice shading in a specific area. Okay, so I want to stay inside the lines, and I want to create an even area that is all the same shade. What I mean by that is you don't want these light and dark streaks in this box. You want it all to be the same value. Okay, or the same shade for this one. So I'd keep working on this. And with these darker values in a pencil, you might need to go over them a few times to really even things out. And you know what? Some people like to even smooth it out then by using their finger and kind of blending it together. Now this next one's going to get a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start off fairly light because I can always make it darker, but you can't, once you shade something in, the only way to make it lighter is to go back and erase. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend time erasing the work I've done. So that's quite a bit lighter. I might need to make this a little bit darker, but I don't want to go as dark as my first value box. Nice and smooth, and on the camera you can still see a pretty good difference between those two. Then this one, I have to go even lighter. So I'm really going to ease up on my pressure, but I still want to make this even gray area. I'm doing this kind of fast, but it's working. I can always go back and darken things in too. Now I look back at the camera. Those are three. That one might be too light still. Let's try to do one more super light gray. And if it ends up being the same as the third one I did, then we'll have to make that third one a little bit darker. So here, nice and easy. It's not the same as coloring something in. Okay, I'm trying to make this even area of a really nice gray shade. It's pretty light gray, okay? Then this last one I'm going to leave white. Now to me, those two look pretty similar, so I'm actually going to go back and make this one a little darker. Now if I make it too dark, it's going to be the same as this one. So there's, especially with the shading, you may have to go back a few times to adjust some things. To me, that one kind of looks similar to this, which means this one, the first box, that went pretty dark. So I could probably make the second one a little bit darker and still have it fit in my scale. Darkest, little lighter, little lighter, little lighter, plain white. Shading. There you go. Now, hatching. Hatching is basically lines that all move in the same direction. Okay? So if you're doing this, the nice thing about hatching is, let's say you only have like a marker to draw with. You're saying, well, I still want to make something that looks three-dimensional. Well, you could potentially create different values with a marker by using hatching or cross-hatching. Okay? So here's what that looks like. Might as well use a fine point. Okay, so hatching are lines that are all moving in the same direction. Like if you're drawing, you know, a golden retriever, an animal that has kind of longer fur, right? So, sorry, my hand's going to kind of block it for a minute here. But hatching lines are lines that are all moving in the same direction. So I'm right-handed, so a lot of times my hatching lines are kind of top right to bottom left. They don't have to be like the length of the box, but you do want them all moving in about the same direction. And in order to create this dark value, which you can kind of see on the camera, you'll be able to see it more as I add more lines. It's lines over and over and over again, but you want to keep them all moving in that same direction. Okay, you don't want to crisscross lines. That's going to be our cross-hatching lines that we get to further on down. Now, if you're already wondering, is Mr. Berg really going to fill in all these boxes during the video? Short answer to that is no. That would be kind of boring and take way too long. So I'll do a little time-lapse stuff. So there's our dark value. You could go even darker than that if you wanted to, but notice how the lines are all moving the same. I've got some little dark areas where it's not even that I might kind of work on. The idea here is now, in order to make a lighter hatching value, I'm just going to have fewer lines. Okay? So what that looks like is maybe you're spreading lines out a little bit more. Could still have them starting and ending, but I'm moving them all in the same direction again. You're just not going to have as many lines. Then for your third value, you'd have even fewer lines, right? Kind of get the picture here? I'm doing things a little bit faster than I should now, just for the sake of time. You can always go back and add more lines, but you can't really take away lines that you already added. So, you don't want to do too many in there. Seems like those two are pretty similar. I might have to go back. Then you have a really spaced out one, then you're plain white paper. Now the cross-hatching is similar, except crisscrossing lines now. So here you can go multiple directions. You could go for your crisscrossing lines. I mean, you could start some off here. It looks like I'm going kind of fast and sloppy, but I'm still staying inside this box. Okay, you can do crisscrossing lines, and this is good for creating like a rough texture. If you were drawing something that you needed it to look kind of rough and uneven, you've got a bunch of crisscrossing lines. That's why it's called cross-hatching, because there are all these lines that are kind of crisscrossing in different directions. They could be straight up and down. They could be straight side to side. But the main idea is that you're creating all these different types of value, and each one has its own use. So look at hatching versus cross-hatching. Cross-hatching, the lines are crisscrossing. Hatching lines are all moving in the same direction. So there is a difference there. Hatching can be used for, like, you know, if you're drawing an animal that has fur or something like that, whereas cross-hatching is maybe like textured, you know, fabric, or maybe like an elephant or something that has that dry, thick skin, or a rhino or something like that, right? And then you keep going. With your cross-hatching, you'd make your lighter box. Once again, you don't want, oh, I got a little too sloppy there because I'm going too fast. Fewer lines equals a lighter value, so on and so forth. So you'd want to do darkest and gradually get lighter, 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 plain white paper. Stippling. I'm going to the big marker for that because stippling, for the case of this example, stippling is basically dots and dots and dots and dots and dots and more dots. Okay? Now, you don't want to completely ruin your pencil by like holding it, like stabbing your paper. That's what we want to try to avoid. But stippling is a really great way to add texture to things. So pretend like if you've ever been to the beach and you're on the sand. Sand is, I mean, there's millions and millions and billions of little rocks in the sand. I get that. But think about how when the water goes on the sand gets darker, right? And then as the water kind of disappears or sinks into the sand gets lighter again. So in order to create a rough texture, you might want to use something like stippling. If you were drawing a beach or an animal like maybe you're drawing like a sea turtle or a tortoise or not a tortoise, sea turtle or a crab or something like that, and you wanted to have some sand. Well, not all sand is the same value. So you do a ton of stippling. Now, I'm not going to bore you with that. Basically, super dark, as many dots you can, then this one's going to be a little bit lighter. Fewer dots, fewer dots, fewer dots, plain white paper. Okay? Stippling is really cool. And it makes a big difference if you do things well. In fact, I have, I'll try to find an example of some stippling that I've done. Oh, and I'll show you some hatching and cross-hatching in a minute. Okay, and then the last one down here is scribbles. Now scribbles, I like to use circles, okay? But when you're scribbling, I'm going to go back to my pencil here, you still want it to look like scribbles. All of these different types of value should not look the same. They should all look different. Otherwise, there's no point to doing different values. So my scribbles, I like using circles, and the tricky part is I'm using circles inside of a rectangle or a square, depending on how you make your value scales. Now, you don't want to get into the point where you're losing the idea or the look of scribbles. You don't want to scribble so much that it starts to look like shading. Okay? See that? Maybe you're drawing a sheep or something. You need to scribble it in. Okay? So you got this really dark scribbled texture. The nice thing about pencil, too, is that you can ease up on the pressure as well. If you're using pencil or colored pencil or something like that. Then your next scribble one, just spread your scribbles out a little more. You're still doing them neatly, still filling up that square or rectangle, with an even value where you try not to have these light and dark areas, but you're creating the next value. I don't want to say the next shade because I'm not shading, I'm scribbling, right? So on and so forth. A little lighter, plain white paper. So your goal is to create 5 value scales, and each scale has 5 boxes. But the last one is plain white paper, so you can just leave that blank. Okay? Let me show you one thing real quick. This is a big PJ Masks picture I made. Okay? For my kids. There they are. Cool. Okay, the reason I want to show you this, look at the sky. I use these gel pens, and the whole sky is like cross-hatching lines. Crisscrossing different directions and everything. Now look at the bricks on this building right here. Hatching lines, all vertical lines. That you can create these different textures and patterns and stuff by doing different types of lines. Here, this orange building, that's kind of like space, that's maybe a little hard for you to see, like spaced out cross-hatching. It looks pretty cool if you do it neatly. Here, these bricks, I'm alternating like shading with a red colored pencil with hatching. Diagonal lines with a gel pen. And from a distance, it ends up looking pretty cool. So what we're doing with value scales here, it really does matter. Take your time doing it. Do a good job. Check it out.